Are you ready for some Jersey? Well, we've got Jersey. The zipper was made here. The light bulb was made here. The color television calls the Garden State home. Everybody wants to know about New Jersey. Sandy beaches, beautiful cities. We even have the Jersey Turnpike. Inventors, music, the movies. You need an exit? We got them too. You want Jersey? This is Jersey.
Welcome to this edition of This is Jersey. We're in Trenton today checking out the 1719 William Trent House Museum, home of Trenton's founder, William Trent. While never the official state house, it's one of the most important buildings in Trenton, or even the state, and it's full of history. Located in the heart of the city, the house's ownership has changed hands many times over the years, but it eventually made its way into the possession of the city of Trenton. After some restoring, the house was opened as a museum tour and has been attracting history buffs and students ever since. We have the museum's docent, Shawn Carney, with us today, and she'll be showing us everything there is to know about this New Jersey historic site.
William Trent was a very successful shipping merchant from Philadelphia, originally from Scotland, and he had interest in about 40 sailing ships, imports and exports. He imported things like wine and rum, exported things like tobacco and flour. He was also involved in the slave trade. He bought and sold slaves in the West Indies and in Britain, and he made himself a very wealthy man doing all this. He originally purchased 800 acres here. That became well over 1,000 because he just kept buying more and more land. So virtually all of Trenton belonged to Trent at one time. He had the town incorporated, which means he had it named after himself. It was called Trent's Town, and then later that changed to Trenton. The house you see here was built in 1719 as a summer home for him, his second wife, and his youngest son. They moved in permanently in 1721, and Trent passed away in the house in 1724. So not very long in this area, just 5 years, but he managed to establish the town of Trenton here in those 5 years with mills and outbuildings, and he started laying out streets and selling parcels of land for people to build houses on. So quite a bit was accomplished here in the short 5 years that he was here. After Trent's death, the house has had about 20 different owners, including 3 governors who used the house as the governor's mansion. The first was Governor Lewis Morris, who was a royal governor. The second one was Philemon Dickerson, and the third one was Governor Rodman McCamley Price. We were on both sides of the Revolutionary War. We had a Tory that lived in the house, Dr. William Bryant, and he allowed the Hessian troops to camp somewhere around here the night before the Battle of Trenton. But because he was a doctor, he set up a field hospital here and treated troops from both sides of the war. Now, because of his British sympathies, he was either kicked out of the house or pressured to move out, and he moved elsewhere in Trenton. After he was gone, Colonel John Cox purchased the house. Cox is an important figure in the Revolutionary War. He was Deputy Quartermaster General, which means that he was second in command of supplying the Continental Army. He owned the Batstow Iron Works, which is in southern New Jersey. They created ammunition and other iron items for the war. And Cox set up a supply depot here and supplied the Continental Army with ammunition and other items. So he was a pretty important guy in the war, and he was also at the battles of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton.
So at that point, how did the city of Trenton own the property?
The Stokes family gave the house to the city of Trenton in 1929 as a gift, but there was a condition. It had to be restored to its colonial appearance. This was a huge undertaking because it had several Victorian-era additions, Victorian-era furnishings inside. All that had to be removed. The additions were torn down, and that took the better part of 8 years or so and was accomplished by the Works Progress Administration in the early 30s. And we opened as a museum in 1939, and we've been here ever since as a museum.
You're in the shadows of all the large buildings affiliated with the city. How do you stake your ground here?
Well, we have this 2.5 acre property, and we have lots of events that go on. We have lectures. In the beginning of June, we just had an ice cream social, and we also celebrated Juneteenth on the 23rd. We also have lots of visitors that come from the Hughes Justice Complex.
Well, let's take a walk inside.
Okay. So we have the grand hallway, and you see the grand arch in the grand hallway. The grand arch separates the public space in the front of the house from the private space in the back. The 2 parlors in the front are formal parlors. They're for entertaining, conducting business, seeing guests. And you would have been greeted in the hallway by the enslaved butler. His name was Yaft, and he would have sat you down in the hall. It would have served as a waiting room, and then he would come and get you when Trent was ready to receive you. It was very formal and fancy. They came from Philadelphia. They came from the town that he established here. He was doing a lot of business with the Port of Philadelphia, so lots of his business associates are probably coming from there. So right now you're in the front parlor. All the furniture that you see in this room is from that early 18th century period, so it's all roughly about 300 years old. The house itself will be 300 next year, so this stuff is about that same age. And if you look closely at the chairs, you'll see a crown motif carved into the chairs. That's because at this point in time, we're about 50 years prior to the Revolutionary War, and they're loyal to the king. And Trent was certainly able to afford all the taxes that were being imposed by the king at this point. So you see this crown motif carved into the chairs. They're reflecting their loyalty in the furniture. And then another thing to point out in this room are these super wide floorboards. These are called king's boards. And the reason they're called that is because normally they're set aside for the king, for shipbuilding. These would have been very expensive and heavily taxed. So this is Trent's way of showing off how wealthy he is by having these floorboards right in the middle of the room here. It's almost like having a Porsche parked in your driveway. Look at my fancy schmancy floors. And these are the original floors. They're called pumpkin pine, and they would have been left raw like this, not stained or anything like that. These would have been the latest and greatest in flooring at the time.
I know this house has the kitchen in the basement. Tell me about that.
Yes, the kitchen is in the basement, which was rare. Most people had their kitchens as a separate building from the house because of the risk of fire. But since Trent was a wealthy man and he had servants, he was able to have his kitchen in his house because he had somebody down there keeping an eye on things 24/7. You see the table set up here as if they're going to have a meal. One of the things we know that they were eating is beef, because the archaeologists excavated cut beef bones on the site. We know that there was a kitchen garden here that grew a various array of vegetables, including turnips. So they were eating lots of turnips. And then they were also eating bread stuffing made with day-old bread. Nothing went to waste, even though they were wealthy. And they would eat any number of elaborate sorts of meals, some of them having up to 12 courses. Trent was known for having very elaborate dinner parties in the house. Entertaining his guests and business associates.
Shawn, that's great. We have to take a break. When we come back, I want to continue the tour upstairs. We'll do that when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us for This is Jersey. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to This is Jersey. We're continuing our tour of the 1719 William Trent House Museum here in Trenton. We've heard about the history of the property and seen the public spaces on the ground floor. Now we'll see some of the items the Trent family used daily here at the house, and we'll head upstairs to see where they spent their personal time. Museum docent Shawn Carney is with us to continue our fascinating tour of this New Jersey historic site.
Here are some of the things that I show tours that come through. Here is the typical fork and knife from that time period. This is very, very sharp. You wouldn't want to put this in your mouth. So they use these forks for cutting, shredding, and poking your food. Once you had your food cut up, you're going to eat it from what's called an eating knife. This is very, very dull. You're not going to cut anything with this. So they're literally putting the food in their mouth with the knife rather than the fork. It's opposite the way we do things today. Or you could use a horn spoon. These spoons are carved from an animal horn. Now, Trent had a full working farm here, lots of livestock, so plenty of raw material that could be used to carve these spoons. And they're very sturdy, and they have the texture of a heavy-duty plastic. They feel just like plastic and much healthier than putting pewter in your mouth. So here what you have is the typical teacup from that time period. It's called Chinese porcelain, and as you can see, it has no handle. So how are you going to hold it? Well, they didn't hold it. Rather than holding it, what they were doing is they're pouring small sips into the saucer and drinking it directly from the saucer. Or they would do this sort of thing to transfer it back and forth to cool off the tea. But it was referred to as having a bowl of tea. Here what you have is a sugar cone. This is how you got your sugar in the 18th century. These were imported from the West Indies, and they're very, very hard. So you're going to need an item called a sugar nipper to snip off a piece of that cone and put that in your tea. Or actually what they would do with it is they would put a piece of sugar in between their teeth and their lip right here and sip the tea through the sugar rather than putting it in the cup. I think they thought it would be wasteful to put it in the cup and have a little bit left over at the end because sugar was extremely expensive. And these sugar cones, along with the imported black tea, would be kept under lock and key, and the lady of the house would have the key. You have wig curlers. They were made from clay or bone. You heat them up near the fire, and then you can curl your wigs with them. You also have shaving gear. The enslaved butler Yaft would help Trent get dressed and would shave him in the morning. So we have a shaving dish that goes under the chin to catch the hair in the soap when he was shaved. And we also have a straight razor, which is the technology that was used to shave people in the early 18th century. So right now you're in William Trent's bedroom, and you'll notice his bed. His bed is called a camp bed, short for campaign, meaning that it's the same design as what a soldier would have used in the field. It's this sort of collapsible and portable tent bed combo. Now, the fabric on this bed is a luxury fabric. Most printed fabrics were coming from India and Europe at the time. So this bed is much more luxurious than the average soldier's bed, but it is that same design. So it could be easily collapsed and packed up and moved somewhere. And the other piece of furniture I want to talk about is the day bed, or the fainting couch. The reason it's called a fainting couch is because women wore very, very tight corsets at the time. They couldn't take a deep breath, and oftentimes when they would eat a meal, they would faint because the corset did not allow for any sort of expansion of the stomach. So the fainting couch allows a woman to lounge back to eat her food, or she could rest on the couch after she ate a meal to take some pressure off the corset, or she could faint on the fainting couch rather than falling on the floor.
Wow. I see you have some money there.
Yes, this is replica colonial money. All the colonies made their own money. So you see there it's 5 shillings from Pennsylvania, 18 pence from another colony, Pennsylvania again, et cetera, et cetera. So all the colonies printed their own money. So here we have a pair of replica colonial men's shoes. The interesting thing about shoes in the 18th century was there were no left or right shoes. Either shoe could fit on either foot. This is because it was easier for the shoemakers to just make the same shaped shoe over and over again. And you would wear them 6 months like this, 6 months like this, so they would wear out evenly.
Right. So what else is up here? I know Mrs. Trent's room is up here and their son's room.
Yes, their youngest child's bedroom, William Trent Jr. There are some Delftware tiles that surround the fireplace in William Trent Jr.'s bedroom. Those are original. They are all hand-painted and imported from Delft, Holland, and they would have been extremely expensive. And it just goes to show you that Trent spared no expense when it came to this house, especially in his youngest child's bedroom. Mary Trent's bedroom is up here as well.
Now, why did they have 2 bedrooms for both of them?
They didn't have to share because they were so wealthy. Regular folks, probably the whole family probably slept in the same room. Your average family had a 1 or 2 room house tops at this time. This is very rare for a 3-person family to have 11 rooms.
Was this considered a mansion back then?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This house is built on the falls of the Delaware. You cannot navigate past this point. You have to turn your ship around here. So this is a very sort of strategic place for a shipping merchant to build his house. You have to stop here, and Trent probably had some sort of wharf or dock here, and he could do business right out of the house with visitors. The Delaware was closer at the time. Due to the development of Route 29, the river had shifted, and it's a lot farther than it was in the early 18th century. It was only a few hundred yards from the house at the time.
Shawn, that's great. We have to take a break now. We come back, I want to talk about the outside grounds, and we'll do that when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to This is Jersey. We're back at the 1719 William Trent House Museum, original home of the founder of Trenton, and we're here with the museum docent, Shawn Carney. We've seen the inside of the house, but there's more to see on the property outside, including what used to be an apple orchard, as well as the gardens, which still flourish today.
We have a kitchen garden out here. It's about 1/10 of the size of the one that Trent would have had. His would have been huge. And most of what we grow in the kitchen garden are things that you would be familiar with, like peas, beans, cucumbers, onions, garlic. But they also grew things that we don't really use or consume too much now, like medicinal herbs and different teas, things like that. The garden is taken care of by the Rutgers University Master Gardeners, and it's a great little oasis in the middle of the city here.
You also have another thing out here, some sort of cellar. Tell me about that.
That's either a root cellar or cold storage, we're not sure which. They could have easily been getting ice from the river in the wintertime, so that very well could have been cold storage out there. So we recently planted an apple orchard here. Trent had an orchard here with over 100 trees. He had apples, he had cherries and other fruits. So lots of hard cider was being made somewhere around in the general area. And you know, they would also use the apples for pies, etc.
Now another building here is the Visitor Center. What was that originally, and what do you do there in the Visitor Center?
That's where we greet guests and we start the tour in there. That was a carriage house from about 1870, 1880, so it's not from the time of Trent, it's way later. We have school groups that come, and in the springtime is our busy season with regard to school groups. And then we get individuals that come from all over.
So I understand you have some archaeology digs going on here. Is there some significance to that?
Yes, the most recent discovery here was in 2015. Archaeologists found the foundation walls to an exterior kitchen that dates to 1742. The first governor to live in the house, Lewis Morris, did not want to use the interior kitchen for fear of fire. So he was a tenant, and he insisted that the landlord at the time build this exterior kitchen with a breezeway in between the main house and the kitchen wing, and a second floor for slaves' quarters. And in 2015, the archaeologists found the foundation walls to that kitchen. And we found thousands of artifacts inside those foundation walls. Very, very old ceramics, tobacco pipe fragments, wine bottle fragments, and food remains. Cut beef bones, oyster, clam, cut pork, bones, etc. So we know what they were eating, and we can piece together an idea of what their life was like based on the archaeology.
That's great. We have to take a break now. We come back, I want you to tell everyone how they can reach out to you and maybe become a visitor here. We'll do that when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us for This Is Jersey. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to This Is Jersey. We're wrapping up our tour of the 1719 William Trent House Museum with docent Shawn Carney. Shawn has given us the full tour of the property and the house, and we can't believe some of the amazing history contained in this museum. If you'd like to see the house for yourself or find out more about their many special events, there are plenty of ways to find out online.
So how can people find out more about the Trent?
You can call us at 609-989-3027, or you can check out our website. It's www.williamtrenthouse.org. And we have ongoing events and lectures here, so please check out our website, and you know, you can stay up to date on what's going on around here.
Now, I know you have a 300th anniversary coming up. You're in the planning stages of that?
Yes, we're very excited. We're going to be planning special events throughout the year, and we are also going to have some more archaeology going on the property.
Why is history important to you?
History is important to me because if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. In order to understand what's going on now a little bit better, we really need to know what happened in the past.
Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us a little tour.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time on This Is Jersey.